Hi again everyone, this is Mike, and now we're going to start reviewing actual portfolio pieces to see how we can improve them. Overall, this piece is very strong. I think the costume design is excellent. The overall posture and rendering is very good, but there's one thing that really stands out as an issue, and that's the cape, and specifically these lines in the cape. What an art director and potential contractor want to see in a portfolio is confidence. And one thing that's very obvious in the lines in this cape is that the artist that was making them was not really confident about what he was doing. He felt that there was a need for detail in that part of the cape, and he knew the general direction the line should be in. But aside from that, it's clear he didn't have enough experience with capes to really understand the anatomy of the cape that he was delineating with the lines. As I mentioned in my first video, sometimes it's just as important in art to know what to leave out as it is what to put in. And just as an example, I've covered those lines, and I think you'll agree that the illustration actually looks better without those lines at all, as opposed to having lines that are clearly not really confident. So even just removing them or having not done them in the first place would have been a better decision. But then we can go further once the artist studies the anatomy of capes a little bit. You can end up with something like this. It's a little scratchy. I just quickly drew it in with the pencil tool here. But you can see there's fewer lines than he put, but they're much more directed. They're much more confident. They're clearly not just lines to fill space. They're all going to the sort of tension point behind this area here where the cape is attached. And I was especially much more bold with the shadows under the cape, and with creating the sense of sort of folds or ripples as this cape is moving in the wind. The next thing that caught my attention was the eye patch and the band that attaches it to the face. It caused me a little bit of confusion. I actually thought perhaps this band that attaches the eye patch is a scar running across the face that happens to point toward the eye patch. And the reason for that is just the sort of logistics of the eye patch itself and how it would work. And to verify, I went on Google and typed in eye patch, and as you can see, which makes a lot more sense, the band on the opposite side of the eye patch goes across the forehead, and then the other side of the eye patch is where it would go around the back of the head. So it would be very unnatural and uncomfortable for an eye patch to cut across the bridge of the nose and the cheek. So that leaves the artist with a couple of choices. One choice is to get rid of that band altogether and just leave the eye patch, and perhaps there would even be an option of peeking a little bit of band through the hair, but that's not necessary. And in this case, I know the artist liked this feeling of this diagonal line, so you could also make the decision to turn it into a scar, which is up to you. If you like the presence of that diagonal line, you think it makes it more interesting, it's possible to keep it as a scar. But in general, it's not a good idea to keep something there that is just a little irrational and perhaps a sign of no research on something, or not thinking things through as thoroughly as one might. Eye patches are fairly common in character design, so it's a good idea to keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind, especially when drawing human figures or organic figures, whether they be animals or monsters or people, is the idea of the curve and the counter curve, or what you can also call the S-curve or reverse S-curve. And what I'm talking about is keeping away from making things based on lines that are overly straight. Nature has a way of balancing force, and for example, I'm going to draw on this layer I can hide later, but if you think of the character's spine, the spine would be curving this way, the pelvis would start to curve the other way. You can see how that's a graceful S-curve. And this is especially true in the limbs as well, where the upper leg would bend out this way, and then the lower leg would actually curve the opposite way. And keeping these curves in mind can lead to much more graceful and elegant and dynamic figures. So what I recommend for the leg is two things. One, ideally, a very slight tweaking of the overall leg to get more of a graceful curve in there. But especially in this case, the artist designed a really nice, cool knee armor design, but it's almost a decal connected directly to the knee. So I would suggest bringing that out a bit, enlarging it a bit, to draw emphasis to the cool armor design, but to also help reinforce this S-curve we're going to. So I created this layer with an enlarged version that protrudes more from the knee, and I used that to help emphasize this graceful S-curve going from the top and then sort of inward here, and then I brought the calf out more so that we have this much more graceful curve. Another important tip is to always keep your skeleton and anatomy in mind no matter what you're drawing, no matter how armored a person is. That limb is still a slave to the bones that sort of make that limb. So in particular, I'm talking about this arm here that's holding the sword. I'm going to turn back on my curves layer here and show you what I mean. At least I hope I am. So here you have where the shoulder bone would be, and you have the upper arm bone, which would go to an elbow. So far so good with the drawing. That seems to be what's happening. But if you look here, it seems to get a little confused or wishy-washy here. The elbow seems to be coming back out this way, but then the forearm swings back this way again, which is very strange, very confusing. So we need to make sure that the forearm, there's actually two bones, but in general, that the forearm, make sure it's coming in a straight angle this way, and then the hand would twist back out this way to hold the sword properly. And there were some other issues with the hand where not only was the hand not twisted enough, but it didn't help that this sword handle is not only a little misaligned, but a little too thick perhaps. So making that sword handle a little thinner would make it much easier to draw a natural, comfortable grip on the sword with the hand in the proper position. I'm not going to redraw this whole arm, but I think you see what I mean, where it's just a little rubber-like and ambiguous in this arm. It has to follow the actual skeletal structure, and it'll just feel a lot more solid and strong and confident. And my last comment for general tips for this particular portfolio piece is to not be afraid of rulers, whether you're working digitally or in this case it was on paper with markers. It only takes an extra few seconds and some patience to when you're doing the sort of inking process to make sure you grab a ruler or even a folded sheet of paper that you can use to get straight lines. It would have made a very big difference to this sword here, especially these two lines here, which are quite wavy. But that's just yet another way that an art director or potential contractor is going to see the sort of visual standards that an artist has. Remember, it's only a concept sketch, but it does only take a few extra seconds to whip out a ruler and get those lines for anything that's quite mechanical to look drastically improved. So now here's a quick sort of before and after to take a look at to review the suggestions that I've made for this particular image. So here's the before and here's the after, and I think the biggest, most obvious improvement is in the cape and the confidence with which it looks like it was executed. The second biggest being the leg and how this creates a more graceful curve and allows more attention to the really cool shoulder armor design. Aside from that, like I said, I did not have time to redraw the arm to better match the skeletal structure and fix the sword. But those are the big improvements. And lastly, getting rid of this sort of confusion of the misplaced eye band, I should say eye patch band. And I'm back in the art program now. There's one more thing I wanted to mention. I won't have time to redraw it, but it's some important concepts to keep in mind when finishing a drawing. And that's related to this sort of idea of curves to be more graceful. It's a good idea to try to avoid a lot of parallel lines that are going too straight for too long. It's just not very graceful. And especially where this is important is in the case of limbs that are very straight and very front-facing in perspective. If you look at this leg here, it kind of looks very flat and not very elegant or graceful. And the biggest reason for that is this extremely straight line. And you can't do much for that line because that's sort of what the anatomy would be doing in this case, at least for the most part. But some suggestions I would have, just as I did on this side, enlarging and extending out the kneecap, the knee armor will help break that up a bit. And then just get rid of lines that are incredibly parallel to one another for no good reason. This segment of armor would look a lot more natural if it were actually, and I'll pick a different color, if it were not going out so much, and fix this angle too. So that's going to help. So now you have lines that aren't completely parallel, and then this thigh could definitely be tapered in more a bit as it goes to the kneecap. Same thing on this side. So in general, that already I think was a big help. Just enlarging the knee armor and making the lines less parallel is going to really help make this side, this leg, look a lot more natural and graceful. And then one could even bring out the side of the calves a bit and taper a little bit more toward the ankle. And this part here got a little sloppy, so I would fix that angle while I was at it. But these changes are basically just going to make this side look a lot more graceful and natural and less flat and stiff. And I think that's it for this one. I hope this was helpful, and next video we'll move on to another image.